Consistency isn't about motivation, it's about identity, who you become when no one is watching. Every day, your brain is quietly rewiring itself based on one simple question. Did you show up or did you quit? Discipline isn't punishment, it's a biological signal that tells your nervous system you are reliable. When you force consistency, especially on hard days, you strengthen the neural circuits of self, trust, resilience, and control. This is the science behind relentless discipline, not chasing inspiration, but training your brain to act despite discomfort. Because long-term success is built in moments when quitting feels easier than continuing, most people believe discipline is something you're either born with or not. You look at highly consistent individuals and assume they possess a special personality, strong willpower, iron motivation, or uncommon self-control. Neuroscience tells a very different story. Discipline is not a fixed trait. It is a trainable neural circuit shaped by repeated behaviors, environment, and how the brain learns to respond to effort and discomfort. At the center of discipline is the brain's ability to move from intention to action. This process is governed largely by the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, decision making, and impulse control. When you choose to act despite resistance, waking up early, training when tired, focusing when distracted, you activate this region. Each repetition strengthens the neural connections involved, making future disciplined actions easier and more automatic. Just like a muscle, the circuit grows with use and weakens with neglect. Importantly, discipline does not rely on constant motivation. Motivation fluctuates because it is tightly linked to dopamine, a neuromodulator that rises with novelty and anticipation, but drops when tasks become familiar or difficult. If discipline depended on motivation alone, consistency would be impossible. Instead, disciplined individuals rely on neural efficiency. Their brains require less emotional energy to initiate action because the pathway has been reinforced through repetition. What once felt heavy becomes routine. The brain also learns discipline through prediction. When you repeatedly follow through on a behavior, your nervous system begins to associate effort with safety and control rather than threat. Early on, effort triggers stress responses, elevated heart rate, mental resistance, and a desire to avoid discomfort. But with consistent exposure, the brain recalibrates, the amygdala reduces its threat signaling, and the task no longer feels overwhelming. This is why disciplined people appear calm under pressure. Their brains have learned that effort does not equal danger. Another key mechanism is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change based on experience. Every time you override an impulse to quit, you reinforce synaptic connections associated with persistence. Over time, these connections become the default response. This means discipline is not about forcing yourself forever. It's about training the brain until discipline becomes the path of least resistance. The struggle decreases not because life gets easier, but because your nervous system becomes better adapted. Identity also plays a powerful role. The brain constantly updates itself, model based on behavior. When you act with consistency, your brain encodes evidence. I am someone who follows through. This identity signal feeds back into the prefrontal cortex, increasing confidence and reducing internal negotiation. You stop asking, "Should I do this today?" The decision has already been made by the person you have trained yourself to be. Crucially, discipline grows fastest under moderate difficulty, not extremes. Neuroscience shows that circuits strengthen best when challenge is present but manageable. Small, repeatable actions performed consistently outperform rare heroic efforts. This is why forcing consistency at a realistic level is so effective. Each completed action becomes a vote for the neural architecture of discipline. In the end, discipline is not a moral virtue or a personality label. It is a biological process. You build it the same way you build strength, skill, or endurance through repeated, intentional use. When you understand this, discipline stops feeling like self-punishment and starts feeling like self-training. You are not trying to become a different person. You are teaching your brain how to show up again and again until consistency becomes who you are. Most people think dopamine is about pleasure. In reality, dopamine is about drive, the signal that pushes you toward action. It governs motivation, effort, and the willingness to pursue long-term goals. Understanding how consistency reshapes dopamine and reward pathways explains why disciplined individuals don't rely on excitement to move forward. Their brains have been trained to find value in effort itself. Dopamine is released not only when you achieve a goal, but when you anticipate progress. Early in any habit, dopamine spikes because the activity is new and novel. Over time, that novelty fades and dopamine release drops. This is the moment most people quit. They interpret the absence of excitement as a lack of motivation, when in fact the brain is simply transitioning from novelty-based reward to effort-based learning. Consistency teaches the brain to attach dopamine to process, not outcome. Each time you show up and complete a task, especially when you don't feel like it, you reinforce a critical association. Effort predicts reward. The brain begins releasing dopamine earlier in the action sequence, sometimes at the moment you decide to start. This shift is powerful. It means action no longer depends on feeling good first. Feeling good follows action. Neuroscience shows that dopamine operates on a baseline. When you chase intense rewards, constant stimulation, shortcuts, or emotional highs, you raise the threshold needed to feel motivated. Everyday tasks start to feel boring and heavy. Consistency reverses this problem by repeatedly engaging in manageable effort without relying on external rewards. The dopamine baseline stabilizes. Simple actions regain their motivational pull. This is why disciplined individuals often feel energized by routine. Their reward system has been recalibrated. The brain learns that progress is predictable, and predictability is calming. Instead of chasing spikes, the nervous system values steady forward movement. This reduces burnout and emotional volatility, two major enemies of long-term discipline. Another important mechanism is delayed reward tolerance. Dopamine neurons respond strongly when there is a gap between effort and payoff, but only if the brain trusts the payoff will arrive. Consistency builds that trust. When you repeatedly follow through, your brain learns that effort reliably leads to results, even if the reward is delayed. This strengthens circuits involved in patience, planning, and long-term thinking. Stress also plays a role. In inconsistent behavior, dopamine and cortisol, your stress hormone often rise together, creating anxiety-driven action followed by crashes. Consistency separates the two. Over time, the brain releases dopamine without excessive stress signals. You become driven without feeling frantic. Focus replaces urgency. Importantly, consistency protects the dopamine system from exhaustion. When you rely on motivation alone, you swing between highs and lows. But when behavior is consistent, the reward system operates within a healthy range. This preserves mental energy and prevents the cycle of overworking and quitting. The most overlooked benefit of consistency is how it changes how your brain interprets failure. Missed days no longer feel catastrophic because the reward system is anchored in long-term patterns, not single events. You recover faster. You return to action without emotional drama. In the end, consistency doesn't drain dopamine, it trains it. It teaches your brain to value effort, trust delay, and stay engaged even when excitement fades. This is the neuroscience behind relentless discipline, not chasing motivation, but shaping a reward system that makes showing up feel worthwhile, again and again selfed. Rust is not an emotion you wait for, it is a biological outcome of behavior. Your brain is constantly collecting evidence about who you are and what you can rely on. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens that internal evidence. Every promise you break weakens it. Over time, these patterns shape how confidently your nervous system allows you to act under pressure. At the neural level, self-trust is built through the relationship between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex sets goals and makes plans, while the limbic system governs emotion, fear, and avoidance. When you consistently follow through on commitments, the prefrontal cortex proves its reliability. The limbic system responds by reducing resistance and emotional noise. Action begins to feel safer. This is why inconsistency creates inner conflict. When you frequently abandon goals, your brain learns that intentions are unreliable. The limbic system steps in to protect you from disappointment by generating doubt, hesitation, and procrastination. This isn't weakness, it's prediction. The brain predicts that effort won't be honored, so it tries to conserve energy. Repeated follow-through rewrites that prediction. Each time you complete a task, especially when it's uncomfortable, you send a clear signal to your nervous system. I do what I say. That signal accumulates. Over time, the brain updates its internal model of you as someone dependable. This reduces internal friction and makes future decisions easier. Self-trust also reduces cognitive load. When you don't trust yourself, every action requires negotiation. You debate, rationalize, and delay. When trust is high, the brain skips this process. Decisions move quickly from intention to execution. This efficiency is often mistaken for confidence or talent, but it's actually trust earned through behavior. Importantly, self-trust is scale-dependent. You don't build it by making massive promises and barely keeping them. You build it through small, repeatable commitments. Neuroscience shows that consistent completion of manageable tasks strengthens neural pathways more effectively than sporadic, extreme efforts. Each completed action becomes proof stored in memory. Stress resilience is another outcome of self-trust. When challenges arise, a trusted nervous system does not panic. It recalls previous evidence of follow-through and predicts that you will handle the situation. Cortisol responses are lower and focus remains intact. This is why disciplined individuals appear calm under pressure. They trust themselves to respond. Self-trust also changes how the brain processes failure. When trust is low, mistakes feel like confirmation of inadequacy. When trust is high, mistakes are treated as data. The brain stays engaged instead of withdrawing. You adjust and continue rather than quitting altogether. Crucially, self-trust is internal. External validation cannot replace it. Praise, rewards, or accountability can help temporarily, but they don't rewrite the brain's self-model. Only repeated follow-through does that. The brain believes behavior, not words. In the long term, self-trust becomes a stabilizing force. It anchors identity, supports discipline, and protects motivation during low-energy states. You no longer rely on willpower to start. You rely on the person you've trained yourself to be. Ultimately, self-trust is the quiet foundation of relentless discipline. It is built one action at a time, through repeated follow-through, until your brain no longer questions whether you will show up. It already knows the answer. Discomfort is often misunderstood as a signal to stop. From the brain's perspective, however, discomfort is a sign that learning is happening. Long-term change, whether physical, mental, or behavioral, only occurs when the nervous system is challenged beyond its current comfort zone. Without discomfort, the brain has no reason to adapt. At the neural level, discomfort activates systems responsible for growth and recalibration. When you encounter difficulty, the brain increases focus, releases stress-related neuromodulators, and heightens awareness. This state, while uncomfortable, is ideal for neuroplasticity. It tells the brain that the current strategy is insufficient and that change is required. Avoiding discomfort prevents this signal from ever being sent. Most people associate discomfort with danger, but the brain distinguishes between threat and effort. True threat triggers panic and shutdown. Effort-based discomfort, such as mental strain, physical fatigue, or emotional resistance, signals potential growth. Through repeated exposure, the brain learns that this type of discomfort is safe. As this learning occurs, the emotional response weakens while the capacity to perform strengthens. This process is known as stress inoculation. Moderate, repeated stress trains the nervous system to respond efficiently instead of reactively. Each time you stay engaged during discomfort, the brain updates its prediction, "I can handle this." Over time, the same challenge produces less anxiety and more control. This is the biological foundation of resilience. Discomfort also plays a critical role in identity formation. The brain assigns meaning to experiences based on how you respond. When you escape discomfort, the brain learns avoidance. When you move through it, the brain learns capability. These lessons accumulate and shape how you see yourself. You become someone who can tolerate difficulty without collapsing or quitting. Another key mechanism is the strengthening of inhibitory control. Discomfort triggers impulses to stop, distract, or seek relief. Resisting these impulses activates the prefrontal cortex, strengthening its ability to regulate behavior. Each repetition enhances self-control, making future resistance easier. This is why disciplined individuals appear calm in situations that overwhelm others. Their inhibitory circuits are well trained. Importantly, discomfort must be calibrated. Excessive stress overwhelms the system and inhibits learning. Neuroscience shows that optimal growth occurs in a zone of manageable challenge. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Regular exposure to tolerable discomfort builds durable neural change without burnout. Discomfort also changes how the brain interprets effort. Initially, effort feels heavy and emotionally charged. Over time, the brain begins to associate effort with competence rather than suffering. This shift reduces resistance and increases willingness to engage. Effort stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like progress. Long-term brain change depends on repetition under discomfort. Single moments of struggle do little. Repeated exposure rewires the nervous system. The brain adapts by increasing efficiency, reducing emotional noise, and strengthening relevant circuits. What once felt impossible becomes normal. In the end, discomfort is not an obstacle, it is the doorway. It marks the boundary between who you are and who you are becoming. When you learn to stay present within it, you unlock the brain's capacity for long-term change. Relentless discipline is not about avoiding discomfort, but about using it as a signal that growth is underway. Identity is not something you declare, it is something your brain infers. Every day, your nervous system observes your actions, especially in moments of resistance, and uses that data to answer a fundamental question: who am I? Neuroscience shows that the brain builds identity not from intentions or self-talk, but from behavior under pressure. When tasks feel easy, they provide little information to the brain. Anyone can act when conditions are comfortable. Resistance is different. Resistance activates emotional friction, fatigue, and doubt. When you act anyway, the brain assigns that behavior extra weight. It marks the action as meaningful because it required effort and choice. Over time, these weighted actions become the foundation of identity. At the neural level, identity formation involves memory systems and self-referential networks. Each time you push through resistance, the brain encodes a memory associated with agency and control. These memories accumulate and inform future predictions about your capabilities. Eventually, the brain stops questioning whether you will act. It expects it. This is why resistance is so important. When you avoid it, the brain records avoidance as part of the self model. Avoidance doesn't just delay progress, it shapes identity. The brain learns, I retreat when things get hard. That belief then influences future behavior, making resistance feel heavier and more threatening. Acting under resistance reverses this loop. Each time you stay engaged despite discomfort, you weaken the avoidance pattern and strengthen the action pattern. The prefrontal cortex gains influence over emotional impulses, and the limbic system reduces its protest. Over time, resistance loses its power to derail behavior. Identity also simplifies decision making. When your brain has clear evidence of who you are, it no longer debates every choice. A person who has repeatedly acted under resistance doesn't ask, "Should I train today?" or "Should I focus now?" The brain defaults to action because it aligns with the established identity. This reduces mental fatigue and increases consistency. Importantly, identity is context-specific. You may be disciplined in one area and inconsistent in another. The brain stores identity evidence by domain. This means identity can be trained deliberately. By consistently acting under resistance in a specific area, you reshape who you are in that context. Small actions matter more than dramatic ones. Neuroscience shows that frequent, low-level resistance followed by action is more effective for identity formation than rare, extreme effort. Each small win reinforces the same identity signal. Over time, these signals compound. Resistance also changes emotional tone. Initially, acting under resistance feels forced. With repetition, the emotional cost decreases. The brain begins to associate resistance with competence rather than struggle. This emotional reframe supports long-term discipline. In the long run, identity becomes self-reinforcing. Once your brain sees you as someone who acts despite resistance, it supports that behavior with lower stress responses and faster initiation. You don't need to force discipline as much. You've trained your nervous system to expect it. Ultimately, identity is built in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when motivation is low and resistance is high. What you do in those moments tells your brain who you are, and once the brain believes it, consistency follows naturally. Motivation feels powerful, but it is unstable. It rises with emotion, novelty, and inspiration, and fades just as quickly. Neuroscience shows that relying on motivation alone creates cycles of intensity followed by collapse. Relentless habits, on the other hand, operate independently of mood. They are supported by neural automation, not emotional energy. The brain is designed to conserve resources. When an action is repeated consistently, the brain shifts control from effortful decision-making regions to habit-based circuits, primarily within the basal ganglia. This shift reduces the mental cost of action. What once required willpower becomes automatic. This is why habits, once formed, feel easier than motivated starts. Short bursts of motivation keep behavior in the prefrontal cortex, which is energy, expensive and easily fatigued. Each decision requires conscious effort. When motivation dips, action stops. Relentless habits bypass this bottleneck. They reduce the number of decisions needed and protect behavior during low energy states. Consistency also stabilizes emotional output. Motivated behavior often comes with emotional highs and pressure to perform. Habits are emotionally neutral. They allow steady progress without dramatic swings. This emotional stability is critical for long-term discipline and mental health. Another advantage of relentless habits is predictability. The brain thrives on predictable patterns. When behavior is consistent, the nervous system relaxes. Stress hormones decrease because the brain no longer has to evaluate uncertainty. This creates a feedback loop where calm supports focus and focus supports consistency. Relentless habits also build momentum. Each repetition reinforces the neural pathway, making the next repetition easier. Motivation, by contrast, must be regenerated each time. Habits compound, motivation resets. Importantly, habits are resilient to setbacks. Missing a day does not erase the neural structure. Because habits are built over time, the brain prioritizes returning to the pattern rather than abandoning it. This prevents the all or nothing thinking that derails progress. Habits also support identity. Repeated actions send a clear signal to the brain about who you are. Over time, behavior aligns with identity, and identity reinforces behavior. Motivation rarely achieves this depth of change. Relentless does not mean extreme. Neuroscience favors sustainability. Small, repeatable actions performed consistently outperform intense efforts done sporadically. This approach protects the nervous system from burnout while still driving adaptation. In the long term, habits free mental bandwidth. When basic behaviors run on autopilot, cognitive resources are available for creativity, problem solving, and growth. This is the hidden advantage of discipline. It creates space. Ultimately, success is not built on how motivated you feel, but on what you do repeatedly. Relentless habits transform discipline from a struggle into a system. They carry you forward on days when motivation disappears, ensuring progress continues quietly and steadily.